it's Enoch from All Dogs Off-Road, and today we are going to continue the rebuild series of Yogi. Today we are going to jump into something that I've been kind of talking about since I saw the 3rd gen Frontier come out, and sitting in their chairs, how comfortable they are. I've been wanting to take a 3rd gen Frontier seat and put it into any of the 2nd gens, whether that's the 2nd gen Frontier or the 2nd gen Xterra. After some playing with and some finagling and some rewiring and a couple of change outs, we have managed to figure out everything we need to do to switch everything over from a 2nd gen to the 3rd gen seat and install it into a 2nd gen vehicle and still allow all your sensors and all your airbags to function properly. So now we're going to dive right into kind of what I did initially to figure out on the 3rd gens and see what we needed to change out so that way we could use the 3rd gen inside of the 2nd gen Xterra and or Frontier. So one of the first things that we had to figure out is, are the mounting points the same? Fortunately, that was a pretty straightforward thing. We pulled out the passenger seat. We grabbed the passenger seat of the 3rd gen, placed it inside, and all of the bolt holes for the brackets match up completely and perfectly. So that's super easy. It's a straight, you just pull that seat out and it'll bolt right in. That part's nice and easy. From there, to make all the sensors and all the safety things work, that requires a little bit of work on your part, but it's nothing too crazy, and we're gonna walk through that process right now. So jumping into that process, we're going to flip up the chair. Everything that you have to do to change these over, it'll be on the underside of the chair. That's where all the safety mechanisms are. This wiring harness that you see here, this is a 3rd gen wiring harness. This is everything that runs the safety systems and the weight sensor for the chair, so that way it knows if a passenger is inside of it, and it knows to activate the airbag and let you know that that person needs to put on a seatbelt if they haven't done so. So what we did first was look at all of the connection points inside of the Xterra, noticing that the seatbelt connector was very similar to the 2nd gen. So we did some testing on this connector, and there is a difference. So you will not be able to reuse this seatbelt connector or the buckle, and the reason being is that the resistance inside of this is different than the 2nd gen. The 2nd gen seatbelt buckle has a resistance of 0.3, and with the 3rd gen it is a 0.6. So you cannot reuse this one. So what you have to do, you transfer over your seatbelt buckle from your 2nd gen over to your 3rd gen. And we did that right on the side here. We'll show you a picture of that, but right on the side here, we mounted the 2nd gen to the bolt and then ran that wire straight back over here to the center and mounted it. So this connector right here is the 2nd gen seatbelt buckle, and then this is your airbag. You do not have to do anything with the airbag. Those are still the exact same from the 2nd and to the 3rd gen. So all you have to do, that's a plug and play scenario. Next thing that you have to worry about is this computer right here. So this computer, this is a CAN bus system on the 3rd gens, and it's OBD2 system on the 2nd gens. So the only way to get the safety systems to work properly was to switch over all of the safety systems. So what we end up having to do is we pulled out the computer and all of the wiring harness from the 2nd gen seat, and we transferred it over to the 3rd gen seat. Now to do this, it requires a little bit of disassembly and reassembly, but it's not too bad. From there, we're going to jump over to this seat and kind of walk through what needs to be taken off of here, and then how we put it into the 3rd gen seat to make it all work. All right, moving over to the 2nd gen seat. I'm just going to flip it up and kind of show you. We've already removed all the components out of this, and we've already transferred them over here. So I'm just going to kind of point out where the components were, and then that we removed them, and then how we removed them, because there is one piece in here that is kind of a pain to do. So let's go ahead and jump into that, and then we'll explain it out. So the CAN bus relay system mounts right here to these bolts. We remove that first, and then we remove the 2 connectors that ran to that CAN bus relay. And that is the seat belt connector and the safety pressure sensor which is it's like an airbag system that they put underneath the seat. So that way when someone sits on it, the computer knows that someone's sitting on it and knows to activate the airbag and to tell you to make sure your passenger puts on the seatbelt. So once you remove that wiring harness from all of its connection points, the air pad comes through this hole right here, and there's a little hose. That hose runs to a small sensor that sits right here. You're gonna disconnect that sensor from here, and you're gonna transfer that entire computer and all the wires that are coming off of it. Don't damage them, you just remove them from the bottom of here, and then we're going to install it into the 3rd gen. So the hardest part about this was getting that airbag out of the seat. And even that wasn't too bad, but it does take a couple of steps. So you gotta go underneath here, and there's a plastic like trim piece, and it wraps around the metal frame that they have here. So you get your fingers underneath, you'll feel a little groove, and you wanna pull down and out at the same time. And that will pop it off. The same with the sides. Just work your way around, and that pops off like that, which then exposes the underside of the seat. Once you get it up to this point, you're now exposing the little airbag that they put underneath here, the air sensor, I guess, pressure sensor pad. Once you remove that, there's a couple of clips that hold it in, so you just pop those clips out from the underside and it comes out very nice and clean. At this point, you need to be careful. You don't want to puncture it. You don't want to damage that bag in any way, shape, or form. If you damage that bag, I'm assuming that it will not work, so be very cautious about that. It's moderately thick, but it's not super thick. Once you have that all out, disassembled, you've got the wiring harness from here completely removed, minus the airbag sensor. You do not need to mess with the airbag, just leave that in this chair. The only thing that you're taking out is your CAN bus relay, your pressure sensor, your pressure bag, I guess we'll call that, out. And then you're gonna take that all out, and then we're gonna transfer it over to the 3rd gen chair. So the 3rd gen chair is a little bit easier to take apart than this one. It has a nice plastic clips onto rails, very accessible and very easy to see. What you do over here is pretty much the same as there. Get on the bottom side, and you just wanna pull that up nice and slow to where it disconnects from that little rail. Once you've disconnected the run from the rail on the side, on the front I mean, and then also on the side, then you're able to pull the seat up. And as you can see here, we've got our airbag. So this is our pressure sensor airbag. And what we did here is we placed it right underneath the seat, nice and gentle, put it back down, and then reinstalled the seat cover as it was previous. And by doing that, it holds the sensor in place and will keep it from moving around, and it'll communicate properly with the OBD2 computer. That back on, there we go. Let's tuck that back in. There we go. All right. So we've got that pressure pad in underneath here. You can see the plastic here as well. So then what I did at that point is there's a hole in the center here, and it just happens to be that pressure pad, you can line it up with that hole. So you want to feed that hose, that little pressure hose, through that hole, and then it'll come up and connect to your sensor. I can't get it off right now, but you push that up and then you push down that little pin and they come apart, and that'll allow you to feed through that hole, reconnect them, zip tie it somewhere sturdy so that way there's no damage to that sensor. And then you've got, here is the OBD2 relay computer that we reinstalled on this plate down here. So there's this metal plate, so we just did 2 screws, put it right back in here. It holds quite nicely. I almost forgot, but on the wiring harness for the 3rd gen, there are 2 connectors that you have to disconnect, and they are the pressure sensors on the 3rd gen. You're not going to remove the sensors, you're just going to disconnect the wires because you're going to replace the action of the sensors with that pad. The only other modification we had to do was cut a plate here. This section right here was a metal plate that came down the side, and that is where all of these connectors mounted from the 3rd gen. So where I have them on the bottom of the seat here, they were actually mounted to the side plate here, which was getting in the way of the Bluetooth module on the passenger side, and that same plate gets in the way of the Rodford Fosgate amp on an Xterra. So you, no matter what, passenger and driver side, you do have to cut that little plate off for this to fit in properly. All right, we got everything switched over to the 3rd gen Frontier seat, and we are ready to install it in the Xterra. Let's throw it in there, see how it goes, and you guys can take a peek. And these are all the factory connectors, and because we don't want to cut these and change these all out and do all that jazz, that's why we felt it was easier to transfer all of the 2nd gen components over to the 3rd gen, and that would also guarantee that all of the computers communicate as they're supposed to. So just when you're done, remember these are your connectors, and this is the only 3 that you should be plugging back into the chair. All right, so now that we've done the hard part, let's jump over to the easy part. And obviously I'm saying that moderately jokingly, but we're talking about the driver's side. So with this one, it was pretty straightforward. We didn't have to change out any wiring harnesses. The only thing that we have to change out on the driver's side is the seatbelt buckle. And the reason that is because the seatbelt buckle for the 2nd gen and the 3rd gen have different resistance in them. It's 0.3 on the 2nd gen and 0.6 on the 3rd gen. So you have to change out those buckles so that way it communicates to the computer and it receives the proper resistance so it turns off that seatbelt light. The only other thing that we had to modify on here to make it fit properly, because I have the Rodford Fosgate subwoofer underneath my seat, which won't be a problem for the 2nd gen Frontiers, but could be a problem for Xterras. I did have to cut an extra piece of the bracket, the main bracket here, off so that it would fit properly. The first piece that I cut off was that plate on the front side that I talked to you about on the passenger that you have to remove so it fits correctly. So no matter what, that front plate has to be removed. Remove as much of it as possible so that way you have plenty of room around the next part that we had to modify slightly was the back bracket on the inside of the bracket, not the outside of the bracket, but on the inside of the bracket. We had to make a little bitty notch on the lower section here to clear the Rodford Fosgate subwoofer. Once we did that, this sits in there perfectly as it should, and then we just throw in the bolts and then plug everything back in. As a side note with this unit, it just happens to be that this is a power chair unit, which you do not have to get. This one is a power chair unit. They made it nice and easy. It's just a positive, negative. It comes out. So what I did on the wiring harness is I chopped off this little dongle so that way I can hook my positive and negative, and I'm gonna run this, not this because this is speaker wire, just temporary, but I'll run proper gauge wiring from here all the way back to the battery or the fuse box. I haven't decided just yet. So that way it has power basically all the time. So at any point in time, if you want to jump in the seat and adjust it, you have that ability instead of having to have the vehicle on. So I'm kind of bouncing back and forth between which way I want to do that. But all in all, get yourself the little dongle. You can run the red and black positive, negative, or positive ground, and run that to whatever power source you decide, and that will run the motors on here. As long as it is 12 volt power, you'll be good to go. right, so we got both of the 3rd gen seats installed into the 2nd gen Nissan Xterra. It's come out really, really good. The whole process, I think with this video reference, I think you should probably be able to do this in a couple hours, possibly a little bit quicker. It took us about 4 hours figuring it all out and seeing what worked and what didn't work, but it should be a pretty quick process for you. If you have any questions, hit us up in the comments below or hit us up on our DMs on any of our socials, and we're looking forward to helping you out any way we can.